Welcome to the Week in Mobile, episode number 9, recorded Sunday, March 20th, 2011. NFC for the win. In this episode, is NFC for real? Can the New York Times make money where no others have yet? And are you stealing from AT&T? All this and more coming up on the Week in Mobile. Welcome to the Week in Mobile. My name is Rob Woodbridge. I am the founder of Untether.tv, and you can find me at robwoodbridge.com or on Tether.tv. I am only with Mr. Jeff Bacon. Jeff is from, obviously, he's the purveyor of all things mobile at BitHeads, which is a great success story, good company. Jeff, thanks for doing this.
Always good to be here on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, can you believe it? It's episode number 9. Sunday morning, bright and early, and let's get right into this. Last week was a busy week as usual in mobile, but I think it was the hangover from South by Southwest. We haven't really seen what's going on as a result. There was some winners and losers that were crowned. I just want to quickly touch base on one of the stories that we talked about, which was the group messaging side, and certainly the biggest buzz that came out of South by Southwest on the mobile space was GroupMe as the dominant platform for group messaging. Kind of smoked everybody. There's a great infographic around. And, my good friend, great company, Scavenger and Seth Prebatch seemed to win the hearts and minds of all those that were at South by Southwest. It's kind of the company that came out of there with the biggest buzz. That's what I've heard so far. I unfortunately wasn't there. I was shivering up here in Canada as opposed to being, basked by the sun. Have you heard anything different? Those are the two stories that I think that came out of that.
Yeah, I think definitely that was the kind of the buzz out of it for sure, is the group messaging and just some of those smaller companies, Foursquare, whether you call it small or not, and Gowalla, those kind of companies that are still not yet mainstream, but finally actually trying to put some business model and change some of the way their users are using their services to actually generate some useful data and some positive revenue. And I think addressed, like, for me, one of the big things was what Foursquare and the location-based services announced in terms of really moving to kind of pre-check-ins or like preemptive check-ins instead of like what I've always said, which is once you're at a retail store, what's the value for that retail store if you're checking in? You're already there. They've already got you through the front door, which is, if you ask any marketer, get the person in the front door. That's step number 1, and after that, your percentage of chance of converting them is so much higher. So once they're already there, big deal. So now they're doing some more work around preemptive check-ins of saying, I'm going to get coffee versus I just ordered my coffee.
Yeah.
And the big difference there is obviously in that if you say you're going to get coffee, immediately Starbucks or Tim Hortons up here or whomever can message you and go, hey, by the way, here's 25% off ours of your local coffee store if you're interested in going there. So it really, I think, enables a lot more proactive marketing by companies by leveraging people's location and desires, like future desires, versus what they just did.
Well, and that's really what we started to see is that we've always talked about, and on my other podcast, which is This Week in Location-Based Marketing, I talk with Steve Kahn, who's the founder of the Location-Based Marketing Association. It's a global organization, and we talk about this quite often. Is that there's some value in checking in at the location, but there's really we're looking for that next layer. And right now, check-ins is a commodity, and location is a commodity. It's like dial tone, so it's time to move it to the next angle. And I think that we've seen some of these guys, but whether you're pre-checking in or post-checking in or checking in on location and looking for coupons, it doesn't matter. It's all the same garbage. Somebody's got to make some money off it sometime. And I think one of the big announcements that came out, and it really dovetails well into our first real lead story, was Foursquare teaming up with American Express, which was a really interesting concept of not having to check in, but leveraging American Express's brand to give discounts and deals and to use the Foursquare technology. And it kind of leads to a bigger conversation around this whole marriage between location and payment. And a lot of talk these days is around NFC or near field communications, and a lot of stories came out this week. I'll just run them down very quickly and we'll discuss them. One of them is PayPal. There was a great article in Fast Company saying that PayPal didn't care about NFC and it was really about eBay. So I'm not really sure. Did they know that PayPal and eBay are, it was PayPal doesn't care about NFC. There was another one about why NFC chips are overhyped and will underdeliver, and this is Eric Schoenfeld from now it's TechCrunch wrote that, and Google is talking about NFC rollouts in San Francisco and New York City because they've done one actually out west. And the iPhone 5 rumors that are persisting around that they won't have NFC in the iPhone 5. We don't know if that's true or not, but some UK carriers and a bunch of and Boy Genius, I think, reports this, and Mac rumors, and on a side story to that is that Visa sees dollars in personal payment opportunity, and that's kind of a no-duh because it's really that's what PayPal's bread and butter is. So let's start this. NFC is a topic that keeps coming up. We can't get rid of it. And it's not even here yet, and people are already either crapping on it or embracing it, saying it's the next coming. Do you think this is not the year of NFC, but do you think that this is a technology? Do we think that this is a technology that's going to catch on?
Well, I mean, I think part of the reason there's so much buzz around NFC is about how disruptive the technology is relative to the fact that it adds so much value to people. That everybody looks at it, and I think, even the people that detract from it, I think if you ask them, look, if someone invested $5 trillion and converted everything to NFC, do you think the world would be a better place? They would probably say, yeah, it would actually save people time and money and everything like that. It's just that they have some negative views on the feasibility of actually getting that amount of traction for NFC itself. But I think everybody kind of agrees that when you look at what it can do, what it can enable for people to reduce the amount of cards in your wallet, to speed up transaction processing time, to reduce fees on it, it's all good. It's one of those things where everybody looks at it and says, it makes sense to do this. It's just a matter of how feasible is it to actually get it pervasive enough so that everybody is using it. And I think that that's where the reaction is coming from. People are on sides of, it's not going to roll out fast enough, and other people are on the side of like, let's promote it because it needs to roll out fast enough because it's so good for people. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to see how much buzz there is over a technology that doesn't. I mean, it exists, but it doesn't exist yet. It's there. There is NFC stuff around a little bit, but in reality, it's not out there yet in terms of usable. But there's so much buzz around it because everybody's going, man, I can just see the day when, if this all comes together, it makes such a difference in people's lives.
Well, it certainly is, and it's like any other technology that's adopted. I think that if we look back at debit and Interact systems or debit cards, they're probably having the same conversation. It's too costly to install. You'd have to install it in millions of merchants right at the point of sale. It's it's a consumer adoption issue. Are people really going to give up cash to use a card that goes? Are they going to trust it from a security standpoint? And then not only that, is it going to slow down the lines? Is it going to anger anybody in line? So these are the same conversations we were having 10 years ago or 12 years ago about the debit system, and now we just take that for granted. So I think that we're on a similar path, and in fact, a lot of credit cards already do NFC. You just swipe and go in a lot of gas stations today, and up here at Tim Hortons in Canada, so you've really got the basis for this already. And all the arguments that Eric talks about in his article are really about our personal views as opposed to practical views. This technology is going to come. One of the points that he makes is very clear, is that it's not really faster. It's not much faster now to wave a phone in front of a terminal than it is to just stick it in for authorization, because oftentimes you don't even need now to sign your credit cards because they've got the security systems down pat. So this is going to come. It's not the year of NFC. Next year's not the year of NFC. I think that you'll start to see this gradually rolling out. But consumer behavior has been known to change, and the adoption of this technology known to change, just like the debit machines are today.
And the difference with NFC compared to something like credit or debit cards in the past is that if you wanted to get a credit card, you had to go take a proactive action to apply for a credit card, get approval, get it shipped in the mail, or set up with your bank. Same with the debit card, you had to go get it. But yes, you're going to have to go get a mobile phone, but everybody just does go get a mobile phone. And I say everybody because it's relatively everybody has a mobile phone or is looking to get a mobile phone over the next few years. So
Yep.
in effect, if it's built into stuff people are already going to buy, so they don't have to make a decision to say, oh, should I get NFC or not get NFC? It's just like, should I be a speaker on my phone? Otherwise, you can't hear the person talk.
Yep.
So it'll just be built in. And the more mobile devices it's just built into, that will really help adopt the rollout of it in terms of consumers being able to use it. And that will help that, the chicken and the egg scenario of, oh, why should I buy the machines if no one has NFC capabilities? If everybody's going to have them because it's so cheap to put in mobile phones already, that will, I think, speed up the adoption curve compared to the decade or so it took for Interact and Debit to take off. I think NFC could compress that down into maybe 3-year span by the fact that if you turn over 400 or 500 million mobile phones every year, that if you start to see 10, 20, 30, 50% of them have NFC in it, you suddenly get a pretty high rate of deployment for that technology.
Totally agree. And I think that one of the things that we're going to see very quickly is NFC for other purposes. It's not just going to be for transactions. It's not going to be for merchant transactions. It's going to be for literally near-field communication. I'm going to be able to scan and get a menu. I'll be able to wave and exchange business information, a la bump or something to that extent, where NFC will become part of your life, and then it will just be part of the way that you pay. And then merchants will be forced to accommodate. It's just going to be another payment system. It's like Diners Club, right? You just add it. So, but there's a battle going on right now with payment processing folks, right? You've got guys like Square who are the underdog, the scrappy underdog when it comes to mobile payments. And then you've got PayPal, and then moving into the credit cards. Obviously, credit card companies are now feeling that this is a good business to be in. And I think that you're right. Once NFC is installed in every device that's manufactured, and Google and Apple will take care of that, and RIM has announced that all of their devices will carry NFC chips, then it's going to be, it could be the carriers, as I said before, that gets involved here as for microtransactions. And at some point, you're going to see, that elusive pop vending machine or parking meters that allow you to swipe and pay without any cash, and it just goes right onto your carrier bill at the end of the month. And I think that's really what's going to be needed in order to be a catalyst for NFC growth, to get used to that. And nobody cares that it's NFC. Everybody just cares that it processes it. I don't have to pay for parking. I get my pop, and then at the end of the month, I get a bill.
Yeah, I think that's, as we were saying, as NFC gets out into more devices and starts rolling out, becoming a little bit more ubiquitous in terms of having the technology, some of the transaction companies like Square, like Visa, are starting to fight over personal transactions, right? Like me to you, transferring cash. And
yes.
Actually, from a personal standpoint, to me, that's where I see the most personal value in NFC, and that, oh, I go out to dinner with someone and, okay, I'm going to cover half the bill. Well, I have the money, I'll pay now. Here, I need to pay you back $20 later. Here, tap your phone against mine. Boom, I'm paying you the $20 back, right? Or whatever. All those personal situations where you cover someone's bill because they don't have their wallet with them, or you just like, oh, I'm taking it to lunch or whatever. And you have to, you're giving someone back a little bit of money here and there. So if you can just like tap back and forth, so much easier and so much cheaper than the $1.50 I'm charged on an email Interact transaction right now, which is, if you can calculate what it costs them to process a check, I'm sure the fact that they're charging $1.50 is a ridiculous statement for a digital transaction. But that's off on a tangent on the side. But that personal transaction for NFC, I think, is for me going to make the most direct day-to-day impact in terms of where that technology rolls out, and whether it's Visa that's enabling it, or whether it's Square or another company, or whether it's a carrier. Excuse me, and that rolls into what you were saying there in terms of what carriers using billing. RIM is actually having, well, there's a rumor that RIM is having a tiff with carriers right now in terms of where mobile payment data will reside on their phones. And there's two options. There's one that's on the handset and one is on the SIM card. And carriers want the mobile payment data to reside on the SIM card so that if you switch phones, you still keep your mobile payment data. And RIM's saying, well, we'd rather it be on the handset because that way they can keep the customer on the handset if they switch carriers. So it's an interesting rumor that came out that really exposes one of the underlying battlegrounds of this mobile payments is if carriers are going to try and fight to keep customers on their network, they're going to want to fight with the manufacturers as they start adding NFC as a payment technology.
Yep, absolutely. And I kind of side with the with the carrier on this, because ultimately keep it on the SIM for a number of reasons, right? A lot of people don't know how to wipe their phones properly. A lot of people don't know, when you're recycling a phone, I want to be able to basically burn that SIM or wipe the SIM and have all my data in one spot. But that's just me. You hear nightmares about people who don't delete their hard drives when they sell their devices, their laptops.
It's the analogy to the way Apple has come in to the carriers and how scared the carriers have been by the one concession they made. The first time they made a concession to manufacturers was with Apple, because AT&T really wanted the iPhone. So they gave up control over payments on the iPhone. And that means now Apple has control. Apple has the mobile payment. When Apple adds NFC and mobile payments, it's going to be through your iTunes account. They control that. RIM is adding BlackBerry ID, or has added BlackBerry ID to their App World store, and they want to use BlackBerry ID as your mobile payment ID for BlackBerry customers. And carriers are going, wait, that was actually a really bad decision to allow Apple to control that, because basically nobody had it before that. And so if nobody had backed down off the stance of letting Apple control that, then Apple would have had to give in. But Apple just kept pushing and said, no, you're not getting it. And one carrier eventually bent and said, fine, we're going to open the floodgates. And now they're having trouble because all the other manufacturers are going, the floodgates are now open. You've made a concession once, so we think you're going to make it again. You've crossed the line.
Well, and that's it. Add Google checkout with that as well, and all of a sudden you've got some of the biggest companies poised to be making big dollars on this, and it's good to see that RIM's getting involved in that. This is a battle that's going on. And PayPal has been always the transaction or the company of choice for small person-to-person transactions. And I know that Visa is going to be moving in there. And I wonder if anybody of these companies, they talk about Visa as the scrappy underdog in this battle. And I was like, no, Visa invented credit, right? Visa invented this. They have the infrastructure, the support, they have the security, they have the parameters, they have the systems, everything that they have. It's in place already. They're not the underdogs here. They're the incumbent walking in. And companies like Square, I don't see a long life for those guys when the credit card companies turn on them. And I don't see a long life. I think PayPal for me is always going to be there because of its convenience. But a lot of these scrappy startups, I don't know, man. I think that the Square will get a nice exit, and the credit card companies will eventually own this space.
Yeah, and actually, I'd be interested to know what the discussions are at the highest levels of PayPal's company about whether they think the PayPal business model could get turned on its head by having NFC personal transactions being able to be done by Visa directly versus having to go through PayPal to do that. Like,
probably going to be cheaper.
I can't pay you with my Visa card, but if I could pay you with my Visa card in the future, why would I use PayPal to do that? Because I've got a Visa card.
Yep.
So I'm wondering what the discussions are like at PayPal. If they're going, well, either we need to partner with someone, or we need to be worried about this, or we need to get an exit strategy out of here so we're making our money before we're dead.
Well, it's an interesting argument here, because where can you use PayPal versus where can you not use PayPal? Where can you use Visa versus and all the other credit companies where you can't? You can use PayPal in a lot of spots, and they've done a great job. But I still can't use PayPal on iTunes. I can't use it on Amazon.com. I can't use it on a lot of these huge retailers, but a Visa solution or a MasterCard or an American Express solution that tied right into my personal bank account would be accepted at all these locations. And that would, or even if Apple decides to get into this space as well, all of that would help facilitate all of those guys who cannot buy things online right now, who are limited by PayPal or gift cards. And that's not a very good economy right now. So this is a huge marketplace, and we're about to see this escalate over the next couple of years. And it's brought on by things like NFC and convenience of pay. You
know where else you can't use PayPal? At Starbucks or Walmart or Sears. So any retail locations. So right now PayPal is a disadvantage in that they're all digital, and Visa is not all retail or all digital. It's a little bit of both. So when they move into the space, they're like, well, one card, you can use it offline or online, where PayPal is like, well, you can use it online, which is lots of money, but, I still go to Walmart, I still go to Sears and Future Shop and Best Buy, so...
Well, I think this is just it's going to be a great battle. I love to see this. Competition is good because it spurs kind of innovation in the industry, but ultimately, you know, there's an infrastructure in place right now, and I've interviewed a bunch of guys on Tether.tv who talk about the future of cash and the future of all of these things, and they say, look, you know what, credit card companies, they're not going anywhere. This is their turf, and they've got a lot of money. They got enough to be able to do this. Even though Square is doing $1 million a day in transactions, I mean that's a pittance.
Yeah,
that's nothing.
How many is Visa doing? Like $1 billion a day in transactions?
At least, and they just have the infrastructure. I'm not crapping on Square. What they're doing is innovative, but I just think that there's a bunch of trials that are being going on now in Europe with the MasterCard about swiping systems and for credit cards, and I just think that you know, when they come in, it'll be coming in fast and furious. So another big story that came up this week was the New York Times erecting a paywall, talking about online payments, and so they erected a paywall around their New York Times subscription for the iPad, and the corollary to that is that Richard Branson's iPad-only magazine called Project, at least this episode number 4, is free. We don't know what that means for you know, 1, 2, and 3. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 are not, or issues 1, 2, and 3 are not free. But we don't know if issue 5 is going to be free. But for the moment, right now, it's the kind of we always knew that New York Times was going to do PayPal or a paywall, but they've just done this week, and it's more expensive than the web version, which is an interesting play. What's your take on this? Anything? I mean,
well, I think I was talking to the New York Times for, you know, the last 2 years plus, from working with them on their crosswords puzzle app that we did at Magmic, and over a year ago, must have been maybe 18 months ago, the CEO of New York Times, you know, announced that New York Times was going with a digital strategy in which they were going to find ways to charge consumers for New York Times content. And there's a few brands in every industry that can do things that other brands can't, just because people are loyal to the brand or they have the reputation for justified, usually by becoming number 1 or number 2. So they have a lot of strong value in what they can offer people. So they can do things like charge people for content where somebody else has to give it away for free because people aren't willing to pay for it. Yep. So the New York Times was in an interesting situation over the last year and a half, is knowing that they were maybe market leaders in news and newspaper from a print standpoint, particularly in New York, but especially having that reputation around the country. How do you leverage that to start enacting paywalls around some of your content without cutting people off completely and then just starting to go to other sources? So I think it's an interesting strategy, the way they've kind of tried to merge paying for the digital content, offering paper subscriptions, allowing you to have a free download of the paper, but only read 20 articles a month. But if you link to them from Facebook or Twitter, you can still read the articles. Like the discussions and the use cases discussions around that, no wonder it took 18 months. Like it's very, very complicated to understand how you can consume New York Times content right now, and how it will cost you, what it will cost you, where the best deal is to get it. It's quite confusing right now. So I think it's interesting that they're the first company to try this, and they may have a leg up by being the first company to try this, or they may find that people don't actually value the New York Times brand for their news as much as they think they do. That if they had to pay extra for it, they might find that the news on USA Today is an acceptable substitute when you're considering charging them, right? So I think it'll be an interesting differentiator where Richard Branson doesn't have a brand aside from his name.
His name, yeah.
But his magazine doesn't have an established brand where you can say, here, you should come and buy this because you know that it's a good quality magazine. New York Times is going, we don't have to tell you what New York Times is. You know what it is. You know the value that we're proposing to you. Now it's going to cost you to access it.
Well, on that note, Rupert Murdoch's The Daily extended the free trial for everybody, I think, until the end of March. I'm not sure what the take-up is. I don't think that they're releasing numbers at this point. But took the Richard Branson's approach, which is we're going to create a magazine solely for the iPad, and by all accounts, it's costing Murdoch a lot of money, but the quality of the magazine is very high. Although, I like everybody else. I consume my news now in bits and bytes when I have a moment of time and something catches my eye. Obviously, we've all been riveted by what's going on in Japan and what's going on in Libya. But I can get that news anywhere, and that's a commodity news. And I don't have a lot of time now to sit down and read 2,000-word essays on my iPad. But this is still one of those industries where they're scrambling, and it's interesting that the New York Times has taken so much time to build this out. And because if they had launched a year ago, they would have missed. They would still be developing for the iPad. They would have missed that revolution. So, a year into the iPad's existence or tablet existence, they're doing things right. One of the things that was really striking is that this is a really huge endorsement for the way that Apple's subscription is. I mean, getting the New York Times to say that, okay, we're going to adhere to Apple's subscription model. They're giving up 30% of their subscription base, their revenue generating from it. With a big brand like the New York Times, it's hard to argue now if you're anybody else.
Well, there's two things with that. One is that the New York Times and Apple have had a long-term close relationship. Mm-hmm. They've been a launch partner for every Apple device since the iPhone App Store, so it was an iPhone 3G. Since then, they've been on launch devices. So the fact that them and Apple got them to be first, I don't think actually says it's an endorsement. I think that's just saying they've got someone there, but if someone was going to be first and going to have less risk, I think it would be the New York Times, because they have such a close relationship with Apple that they may be doing it to, saying, well, we have extra value in this because it keeps our relationship with Apple close. So, yeah, we're losing 30%, but let's write off 10% of that as value building with Apple as a relationship partner in terms of marketing, right? And it's not really that they're losing 30% because the cost on digital is higher. So, say the cost on digital is 20% higher and you're giving 30% back and you're writing 10% of it as a marketing expense, you actually aren't losing money by doing it because you're taking that 30% and getting your value out of it. So,
well, they've dubbed that as, you're paying the extra $5, $20 versus $15, $20 for the iPad app versus $15 for the web because of the interactive nature of the iPad app. And so you're right. It's really, they're charging 25% more, and that's where it's going to come from. Obviously, these guys are not new to business. And
that's a perfect number. So $20, 30% of 20 is $6.
Yep.
So that brings down to $14. So it's 50 on the web, and they're netting 14 on the digital copy. Like no one would say that's a bad deal to take a $1 cut to get it on there for digital subscriptions put in, and then they're going, oh, that $1 is relationship building with Apple, and they would gladly pay $1 for that to keep their relationship with Apple so strong. The halo effect of having that relationship is important, I think.
Well, it's whatever happens is that we're too early to see what's going to happen. Other than the fact that instead of going down, the price is going down. What you might see is the price is going up to accommodate Apple's 30% cut, which is not good for the industry, not good for consumption, and would probably push people into the free apps like the HuffPo or something like that. That over a period of time, you can collect the same amount of information, you can read the same news. You're just getting it from different sources, other than paying for it.
It'll be interesting to see because the one weekend I had the iPad, whatever, last week or the week before that I had it home for the weekend and tried Zeit on the iPad. Immediately I was like, okay, if I had an iPad, this is how I would get my news. This is a personalized grabbing of news off the web. I don't care whether it's from New York Times or USA Today. I care that the story is relevant to me. I'm getting it off of that. So can a single source compete with a news aggregation source that's free or that would be advertising supported?
Only if they cut off the news. Right? If they cut off the ability to repurpose that news or remove it from RSS feeds or remove the ability to share, put it behind a paywall. So at one point you might be able to bring the New York Times stories into Zeit or Flipboard or any of the RSS feeders. But now you wouldn't be able to do that. They'd cut those things off, and then the news would be from someone else. You'd be able to get the news.
Right. That's my point. Is I don't think I would notice.
Yeah.
Using Zeit where it's pulling from so many different sources to try and pull personalized news, it mitigates the fact of having a few of those sources go offline because you almost don't notice. The whole point is that it's pulling in an aggregate amount of news from wherever sources that are supposed to be interesting to you. And maybe there was no interesting news on New York Times today for you, or maybe there was and it was cut off. There's no way for the consumer to know. I think it would be hidden from me and I wouldn't notice the difference.
It's certainly an interesting time. I can't wait to see how this plays out. Over the next couple of months, we're going to see what happens with Richard Branson. We're going to see what happens with the New York Times as they release their numbers, because they're going to have to. We're going to see those numbers. And Rupert Murdoch's The Daily will also have to reveal their numbers when it comes to subscriptions for this. But we're talking about pennies, right? We're talking about less than $1 a day to get the New York Times pushed to you, which is not a lot of money. Because if you're in Canada like you are, and I am, or if you're outside of New York, or if you're outside of the States, it's going to cost you anyways. So this might be a great thing for expats or for people who are outside of the U.S., but not so great if you're inside of the U.S. and you can get it on every street corner.
The other interesting thing about it is in terms of giving up the 30% or having the prices increased to accommodate giving up the 30% to Apple. I don't remember what Google's Android terms are, but RIM doesn't actually prevent you from running your own payment system on BlackBerries and not giving up the 30%. So if Google's checkout has a lenient policy like that, it'll be interesting to see what the effect will be in terms of having content come out on Apple being 30% more expensive than other platforms potentially, because you can recoup your 30% by having your own payment backend on other platforms.
I think there's writing in the end user license agreement for all these stores that says that you can't create the same product for multiple platforms and charge different prices for that product. You'd have to modify the product. You'd have to create a new instance or a new product in order to be able to accommodate it. What's that?
Not an app world.
No, but I think it is between Google and Apple.
Google the same functions.
Yeah. So you definitely have to. This is what they're saying in the Apple end user license agreement, is that there's to the effect that you cannot have a similar product being charged less or charging less for it on other platforms. So
Apple says, yeah.
So right now you're playing with the dominant place. They have all the chess pieces right now. They're the dominant platform, and that's going to change as we evolve over the next year. But right now that's their game. Interesting that you brought that up, because one of our stories is obviously Amazon moving into Android's space and doing the Amazon App Store. We knew that was coming. But what's interesting about this whole story, at least for me, was that when Amazon does launch, it's going to launch with the newest Angry Birds, which we haven't talked about today this week, because they're filing for a freaking IPO of all things. Anyway,
much to your dismay, I know.
I mean, can you say Netscape all over again, right?
Hey, Netscape cashed out for $4.7 billion selling to AOL, so I can't really complain about that for them.
And where are they today? I know. I mean,
on a beach somewhere. So again,
yeah. Mark Andreessen is actually one of the most active angel investors in the Bay Area right now, investing in some of the best companies. So, yeah, if that happens, but anyways,
it's an interesting, it's a sidebar, but it's interesting to see how. Well, we agree that a lot of these companies from the dot-com boom were overvalued and way too much money went to these people that were doing them. A lot of the angel investors that are spending money on a whole bunch of small companies right now, that's the money they're spending, is the money they got from these overvalued dot-com companies. The money is going back into the tech industry.
There's no doubt.
Smaller companies. So
there was absolutely no doubt. But I think about the tens or hundreds of thousands of people who got bilked, who lost all their money and lost their jobs. So it doesn't make up for one guy who decides to invest or employ or fund 1,000 people. So all the power to him. But an IPO for Angry Birds is insane. However, they're not EA, but maybe that's what their goal is. So, so Amazon is launching with an exclusive on Angry Birds Rio, which is the next release. Which I can't imagine how innovative that game's going to be. But what they've decided is that their pricing strategy is going to be that they just saw a glimpse of it. There was an absolute glimpse of. I think they posted a page somewhere, and it actually was up for a moment and then was brought down very quickly, where it had the prices of it, and they're cheaper than the Android marketplace. So this is the way that they're going to compete. Obviously, is on volume, just like they did with. They're going to disrupt the app space, like they did the book space, Amazon. So
yeah, I can't remember if this is consistent with their other product categories and how they deal with publishers. But the agreement for getting stuff onto the Android App Store there is basically you set a MSRP, basically, right? You set a suggested retail price, and that's what they'll pay you. They'll pay you 70% of that MSRP, but they basically can then charge whatever they want for the content.
Right.
So it allows them to do whatever promotions they want, to discount however they want.
On Amazon, you're talking about, yeah.
On Amazon, and they give you that percent. I don't know if that's the same way it works with books and other content on there or not. I heard it is the same with a few of the product categories they're on, but I'm not in that space, so I'm not 100% sure. But it's a good, I think it's a very, very smart strategy by Amazon to say, here you go. We're going to give you the MSRP, but we're going to price control our store. If we want to take a hit on our 30%, we'll do that to gain market share.
Yep. Well, I mean, that's what I love about it, and I don't know that there's much more to say about that other than this is, when it comes to findability, which is the biggest issue around app discovery. Certainly Amazon is going to help that with their SEO capabilities, and this is exactly why even RIM exposed, and Apple to some extent exposed their app stores on the web so that people can actually find and reference and link to these. That was probably the best thing that RIM did. It pushed the industry a little bit forward for discoverability, and Amazon's going to help with that.
And what's interesting, when we look at Amazon launching an Android store and other carriers potentially launching them, when people saw iTunes first and saw the App Store there, one of the things developers who did not have a lot of experience in the mobile industry said was, this is great. I can finally put content on one store and reach all of my users. And what do we see now? How many services are there that are designed to group apps together for visibility? Yep. Whether it's through OpenPaint, whether it's through these marketing networks, whether it's through Tapjoy, there's a whole business, exactly. There's a whole business around basically having small stores reselling content from Apple because no one can find anything, no one can get visibility. And so back in the day, I can't believe I say that in less than a decade, but when we're doing J2ME and BlackBerry content out on 100 different carriers around the world or 10 different storefronts, and we're going, oh, it's difficult to manage. And everybody's looking at it going, it's difficult to manage getting your content to all your users because you have to submit to 10 or 20 or 30 carriers and stores and all of these requirements. Well, you got the same problem today. I mean, you may be submitting one binary, but you still got to manage the publicity of your app across all these different stores. And developers said, oh, look, I can do away with publishers. Publishers add no value. It's like, well,
not only that, they said they could do
people on staff that are managing these micro storefronts everywhere. So it's going back to the fact that, yeah, it was difficult in the past, but there was a positive reason to have multiple access points to a store, which is multiple points of visibility for your application versus a single point that if you don't have visibility there, you're dead.
Yeah, you're done. And even developers went so far as to say that they don't need salespeople or marketing dollars, right? But I think hopefully now people realize that it's not just as good as throwing it up. The staggering statistics that not very many applications get downloaded more than 1,000 times, right? And it's a very rarity. I think it's 54% are downloaded less than 1,000 times of all the apps in the App Store, and that is staggering. So you really do have to invest in the effort, and now that you really have to start to think about your strategy for discoverability and how to integrate into all of these stores. And Amazon is just another one. So a couple more stories just before we finish off. One of them is I don't know if there's a comment here or not, but AT&T is now penalizing people who have jailbroken their iPhones, who have enough bandwidth to basically fuel a small nation, or enough bandwidth to do it. And what they've done is they're now penalizing, or they put a deadline on for anybody who's broken or jailbroken their iPhone and is tethering their iPhone and using as much data as they possibly can consume, on other devices. So they've given them till the end of March, I think, to be able to say you're either going to stop doing that, or we're gonna move you to this lesser plan, even though you're grandfathered in at the unlimited plan, which will include tethering, which is there's a cost for tethering and a cost for data consumption, just normal data consumption. I don't know if this is a story, but seems like basically a strong arm tactic here. I'm paying for the bandwidth already. I'm paying for it all. Why wouldn't you let me use it for tethering?
Well, I mean, I sympathize. I don't usually sympathize with carriers, but in this case, I do, because the unlimited plans they set up were specifically intentioned for the amount of data you can consume on one device.
Yep.
That was the point of setting up a limited plan. It was, what? We're going to figure out what the average customer is going to use and the max customers are going to use on their mobile device, not across 17 different devices, and therefore we can afford to give them an unlimited plan, and we'll eventually change it, and we'll have these grandfathered people in that will slowly move out of the system as they switch carriers or switch to other plans. So, I think the interesting point is that they're making a big deal out of, I think, impacting a small number of users. Now, I don't know how many people are still on unlimited plans from AT&T that have a jailbroken their phone. And the only reason jailbreaking is part of this is because that's the way you get around the restrictions on AT&T about tethering.
You used to be able to, right? Now you I think with OS 4.3 you have tethering capabilities.
I think it's carrier. I don't know if it's
carrier switch. Yeah.
I think it's still allowed. I think if you don't jailbreak it, you're still a carrier switch to turn it on and off.
Yeah.
But basically, I mean, I understand what they're doing is they're saying, you know what, we're having these users sit there and suck, you know, torrents and tons of stuff downloaded off of their wireless connection, which in theory carriers should be able to build out their networks to support. Like the justification of having a dispersed set of towers that are as widely distributed as possible to minimize the number of towers, thereby maximizes the load on each tower, and thereby minimizes the amount of bandwidth that each user can actually take per tower.
Yep.
So I don't sympathize in the fact that they rolled their network out with the least cost possible to deal with the below average user on it or average user on it. And now they're dealing with the fact that users are increasing the amount of data and wanting to use their wireless connection for more wired-like connection types. But
yep.
You know, the future is definitely this way for carriers, is trying to make sure that people are paying for bandwidth. We're going through this on wired connections in Canada with the
caps, yeah.
Caps, yeah, and the UBB, basically user paid bandwidth legislation that's kind of on tap and off tap, and depending on who you ask, is a good or a bad thing. And carriers trying to charge very high rates per gigabyte downloaded versus their cost.
Yep.
And wireless carriers are the same way. Wireless carriers' costs are higher than wireline, but you know, it just comes back to, what do carriers want you to use your mobile device for? What do they want the wireless connection to be? What are they licensing you this access to spectrum for? And I think that one thing carriers have done is that in the past they haven't really dealt with what they're giving users. It's like,
they haven't been specific. They have not been specific.
If they said what you're doing is you're licensing spectrum
and use from a device, like from a handheld device. Yep.
Then it would be more clear for people, and it wouldn't be such a big deal when they're saying, no, look, it says right here, you're licensing spectrum of this much for one device. You have to put it in a little more customer terms of licensing spectrum maybe, but you know, if you spelled it out in big letters instead of in minor small text on the 17th page of your user agreement, I don't think it would be a big deal. I think people would recognize that, and I don't think it would be this huge thing if everybody did it. Like, if one customer carrier does it, they're worried because they're going to be, all the other carriers are going to be like, oh, no, look what they're promoting, not realizing that on the 17th page they're doing the same thing of their user agreement. So,
well, whatever happens, it's going to be a contentious battle. I think that there's going to be the few who are still doing this are going to be very vocal. And you know, there's even camps here is that you're stealing from a carrier, or you know, the carrier is giving you the bandwidth allotment. So you know, and now they're just trying to pull it back from you based on you know, your use. This is one of the times where I'd say I'm actually glad I'm in Canada for this, because Rogers has enabled the tethering on 4.3, OS 4.3, and I have a 6 gig plan up here, and there's no restrictions. I can tether to my heart's content as long as I, you know, maintain. I can use my 6 gigs. I've never come close, but there's no issue here. They didn't charge me anymore, and now they're actually doing device sharing so that I can have one plan for multiple devices that use the same data, which is a long time coming, shall we say? So hopefully, you know, this is going to be a battle for AT&T, but I think really it's the few that are being the most vocal right now.
Well, it's only a problem. It's only an issue with AT&T because they have unlimited plans that are legacy. The limited plans is not a problem with. They really couldn't care less if you were paying for 6 gigs and tethering and using your 6 gigs for that. They're saying, we're going to allocate you 6 gigs.
Yep.
However you want to use it, they should say, knock yourself out. It's 6 gigs, right? If you run out of it in a week because you're torrenting, you can't use data for the rest of the month, or you got to pay more.
Yep.
It's the fact that it's an unlimited plan that you can take your 100 gigabyte, you know, wired connection and start streaming it over your Wi-Fi wireless, and that's the problem.
Isn't that funny though? You know, we've beaten this to death, but back when the first version of the iPhone came out, it was the very first version of the iPhone came out, Rogers refused to give unlimited, to bend to Apple, who wanted unlimited data. That's what AT&T did. They signed the exclusive with AT&T, and they came to Canada and said, Rogers, we need you to give unlimited data. And Rogers said, no way. So they capped it at 6 gigs, I think, is the biggest package you can get. And that was only for a limited time. It was a 60-day buy when you bought your iPhone. So now you can't get the 6 gig anymore. So now it's 2 gigs or 4 gigs, I think, or even 2 gigs. And Rogers said, no way. And I was very critical about Rogers saying, come on, get that phone up here, deal with the infrastructure problems later. But, 4 years later, and all of us, or 3 years later, and AT&T is now suffering from that, and Rogers is able to go ahead and open tethering up to everybody. And for one time, I can think, I was happy with Rogers, just one. Just one time. So the last story, it's not really a story. It's just, Telenav, huge GPS data company, provided some interesting statistics about where people check in from and what they're using their mobile devices for. And, I don't think that there's anything newsworthy here about what people are searching for other than, come on, you can't find a Walmart, which was the #1 store, Googled about location. It's like, they're everywhere. Just look at the corner across the street from you. But one of the things that this really does is it shows you where opportunities are. And I think that that's one of the things for me is when I look through here, when it came to the way the patterns that people were using, one of the, aside from directions, it shows you what cities were most, had the most GPS based searches. It said, it showed the, what else did it show here? Oh yeah, one of the big ones was the cities with the most cost-conscious drivers. Baltimore. These were looking for people looking for the cheapest gas. You notice that like New York isn't there or LA isn't there because you can't find cheap gas there. But this is really when you start to aggregate this data, and it was a huge number, like 20 million subscribers. So this is big. It shows you what brands people are searching for. It shows you what people can't find. And it shows you maybe a little bit of a micro niche where you could build a business around, providing good information. And the last thing it shows you is that your mobile web site needs to be awesome. And you need to be found inside of Google. And you need to be able to create these things so that it's convenient. This gives you the ability to find out what people are looking for and how they're finding your information. So I don't know. Did you find any gold mines in there?
Actually, the most interesting piece of information, not because the rest was interesting, but just because it actually kind of surprised me the most, was actually the fact that the top 5 food searches were pretty much all even. It's like pizza, Mexican, burgers, Chinese, and American, but it was like 21%, 24%, 18%, 18%, 20%. Like, basically the top 5 all broke even in terms of what people were looking for. There wasn't like everybody was looking for pizza more often than not, which... you kind of would assume if the demographic skewed towards college students, for example, that the food categories would skew. But I don't know if that shows that Telenav's users are across all demographics, and so their food choices are thereby distributed fairly evenly. So thereby it gives validation to the rest of their data that it should be accurate as well, because one category in which you would think would be skewed if their demographics were skewed isn't. You can verify.
But it's odd though that. Like, are they searching? One of the things that they didn't say was that are they searching for brands? Or are they searching for when it comes to food? So they have in the infographic, which is a link up here, they have McDonald's and Pizza Hut and Toys R Us and all these other things. But it just shows you what are the prominent brands, because the top 5 business searches were Walmart, Target, Starbucks, Best Buy. What is that? Chase, yeah. So when you start to think about that, there is a gold mine of activity here. And if you're doing generic pizza searches, why wouldn't you be able to capitalize on that if you're doing your mobile stuff properly? You should be able to be dominant. If people are looking for a pizza close by to you, you got to make it convenient for them to be able to order from you. But I don't see like Wolfgang Puck or any of the big restaurants on here. So I'm going to assume that 20 million people aren't hitting that up.
It is to note, though, that in the top, 10 brands, McDonald's and Pizza Hut are the only 2 food brands that are in there.
Yeah.
So obviously those, you could infer from that those are the top 2 fast food brands in the States, at least by mobile search. And that if those 2 companies should look at this data and say, by GPS search, and I'm assuming most of this is mobile, although it doesn't specifically say that. I don't think that this is all mobile searching, does it? But
Telenav has, it's device-based as well, right?
Right. So, but McDonald's or Pizza Hut should look at this and say, okay, we have this high percentage of GPS-based users looking for our brand, so we should enhance our brand presence using GPS, because there's a demographic of people using GPS that want to find our brand. So what can we do so that for Pizza Hut, for example, so that Domino's doesn't creep up? Like, what can we do on GPS based so that, you know, we are looked for the most? What is the second most thing? What can we do to mitigate the second most thing? Because we'll have an even better advantage that way.
Yeah. Well, whatever it is, you know, whatever value this is to you guys who are listening or watching this, is that this is the first study that's been released like this of data where it's such a huge number of participants. And this is where you start to get the aggregate GPS and GPS data. Layer on top of this something like what TomTom does and their analytics tools, bringing in Foursquare check-ins or any of that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden you've got a really great picture of gaps and opportunities, I think, in the market about where you can leverage mobile to be able to do your business properly. So that's it. I mean, we've hammered these stories. I like the format of this. I'd love some feedback from you guys who are listening to this. Not you, Mom or Dad, or Jeff Bacon's parents either, or wives or anything along those lines. Because we want to know. I'd like to tailor this to pick out the key stories that are going on in the industry that happened last week and their importance or insignificance as we go forward. And I think that we've done that with NFC. I think we've done that with the free versus paywall, and even about around the stores. So if you got some feedback, send it our way. Untether@gmail.com. Untether@gmail.com. We really want to hear if this is a good format for you. If not, we'll change it up. Let us know. Right, Jeff?
We will.
Jeff Bacon can be found at about.me/Jeff Bacon. I'm obviously at robwoodbridge.com or untether.tv. And I implore you to go and take a look at what's going on Untether. It's some pretty cool stuff. Great interviews up there. And Jeff's alter ego is at bitheads.com, which is his place of employment, where he is, as I said, the purveyor of all things mobile. Your event, March 31st?
March 31st, Mobile App Madness in Toronto. MobileAppMadness.com. Should be an interesting day. I think there's, as of maybe Thursday or Friday, there was about 69 tickets left. We're trying to get, I think, a target of 150 people.
Yep. So
that means that they're closing in on 100 people already signed up for it. So
it's a free event in Toronto.
Absolutely free. So
absolutely free. You'll get a nice continental breakfast.
You'll get good talks by people anyways. So
all right, and yeah, it's right. Coordinated well with you for opening day for the Toronto Blue Jays, and hence for those who are listening can't see it, I'm wearing my New York Yankees shirt just to instigate. And we wish Anthony, wherever you are, a speedy recovery from your illness, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
You should mention to everybody that the Week in Mobile is now on iTunes as well. So
yes, yeah. Now on iTunes. Go search for it. It's on iTunes. All right. Thanks, Jeff.